see. Should be all right. Started. First of all, thank you guys for joining, taking the time out. I know y'all are very busy and everything else like that. So, thank you for taking the time. Uh, One of the things, so an idea kind of got started here inside of Modern Guide is there's been a lot of conversations about people saying, "Oh, well, don't take rest days anymore. There's no need for rest days. Who needs to take rest days? Because if you take rest days, it's just training your body to not always be up to performing and all this other kind of stuff that we're seeing kind of people are talking about and saying out there inside of social media, inside of just the community itself. So we wanted to get kind of y'all's perspective, right? Y'all have been in this industry for a while. Y'all have been doing a lot of this stuff for a while. So kind of like talk about the difference of like what's the science behind rest days, right? What's y'all's take on this whole thing? And then kind of jump in from there. So
Well, look, I've got a mouthful, and I just I don't want to be pushy here, so I'm just going to sit back for a minute, let Yancey kind of take the table for a while.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that I've noticed in the world of working with OCR athletes is that one, the body's going through it in the training that happens in obstacle course race training. It's somewhat different in a lot of the sports that we were used to, coming from a running background or working with triathletes. The body goes through, when Richard and I talk about something like OCR specific strength training, there's a demand that can be somewhat different compared to sports. And I think we also have a lot of athletes, massive percentage of athletes that are coming from, or they're not coming from a world like maybe a college track background or a professional cycling background, or where they were used to dealing with tapering and the benefits that can come, some of the physiological benefits that can come from a successful taper. And one of the things that I've noticed is the unique mental aspect, and kind of finding that happy balance with some athletes. I was just talking with Tia Reagan, and she freaking loves taper week. She loves it. And some athletes on the opposite of the spectrum will go freaking bat crazy with you trying to work in a professional taper, and trying to find a balance there with over a broad spectrum of athletes versus pulling the rug out from under them and say, no, it's got to be my way or the highway. So that's been, and you talk to them about the increase in total blood volume, the increase in VO2 max, little things that science says, hey, we've seen through studies, really getting your HRV back on track and making sure that number's nice and high, when you're measuring your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system with HRV, which is a lot of cool things out there right now that make that easier. But good old school, just going by feel, that how we used to do it back in the old days, just getting some things back on track and finding the right taper for each person. When I say finding the right taper, there's an actual physical benefit there when you nail the right taper. But when I talked about dealing with the athletes on the opposite end of the spectrum and everybody in between, kind of finding what works good for them mentally, I've learned is just as important. If you tell Rhea, you gotta cut it back. There's a fine line there with somebody like Rhea, where Tia, she's gonna freaking love it. She's gonna listen to exactly what you're saying, and she's gonna love it. So finding that balance there is fun, working with a broad spectrum of different athletes.
Well, can I step in for a sec?
So you got the floor, buddy.
All right, so let's just back up a little bit. In 1936, Dr. Hans Selye introduced what is called the general adaptation syndrome. And what they determined was how the body responds to physiological stress. So at the end of the day, there is a response to the amount of stress you create for yourself. And what we're really talking about is adaptation. Training is a function of adaptation. You do what you do to find a positive or beneficial adaptation from your training responses. And part of that training cycle is got to do with recovery. Now, I don't care who you are, if you dismiss the potential to get the benefits from that adaptation being allowing your stress hormones to become normal, allowing your body to come back to a sense of homeostasis, you're destined to fail. You can get very comfortable within your own skin relative to the type of stress you take on, but it still becomes a function of you're going to break. It's just a function of when. And it may just show up in a bad performance. It may show up in illness. It may show up in injury. It just depends on how well you take on the stresses that you take. Now, when we talk about these, I have the same experiences that Yancey's had with various athletes. Some of them taper well. Some of them just don't taper at all. And they are under the emotional auspices that if they take time off, that they're not going to perform. So it is an emotional response to the influences. It's not being comfortable, not being on board with their training. You understand what I'm saying? So, for example, I spoke to Rhea. I did an interview with her just recently, and she's a 7-day-a-week girl. And I bit my finger all through the conversation because I don't care how well she's performing right now. I know that's just a hellbound train. Eventually, that will pay. It's going to pay back. And she's gotten good at it. She's gotten to a point where she's pretty comfortable with the level of intensity she takes on over 7 days a week. But I would argue that in a circumstance like that, even with a top level athlete like that, you tend to almost subconsciously govern the intensity of your efforts so that you're capable of producing the work for 7 consecutive days. Where had you taken a day off, intended to take a day, or maybe 2 days off, the level of intensity, the responses you get from the training outcome may have been far more favorable than just pushing yourself 7 consecutive days in a row.
Yeah, it's a neat. It's a fun thing to watch when you talk about, if you look at an athlete like, we use Rhea when there's so many athletes. Richard and I work with a lot of, athletes that haven't been doing this very long, and the difference, when you're an athlete that's built up your aerobic conditioning over a long period of time, it's proven that, kicking things back for a week or two, you're not going to lose any aerobic fitness. And somebody that's been picked up the running gig for 3 or 4 months, that's a little different for somebody like them compared to that athlete that had a lot of time on feet over the course of many years. So there's this psychological thing that goes on with so many athletes, and they just they think they're going to lose their aerobic fitness in very short time, and they will oftentimes miss out on what I call arguably the greatest. We talk about performance enhancing drugs. A good taper may be one of the greatest performance enhancers when you nail it. I was just talking with Tia on the phone about 20 minutes before this, and she felt like an absolute rock star in Jacksonville. I mean, she was running with Nicole and just felt like, oh my God, we were so fluid.